And then, Voltan, we shall see who is Lord of the Dance.
Welcome back to Nerd Legion. As I have stated on previous shows, we are starting a new project on this show. And it is not that we aren't going to do some of the big and upcoming, releases. It's that when we have a bit of a slower time, we're going to start a project which is watch every single sword and sorcery movie from the 1980s. This is my idea. Doa loves it. It's going to be really
I'm shaking
fun.
my head. I'm shaking my head, but not because I think it's a bad idea. I think it's a great idea. I just am like, what have I gotten myself into here? Like, I feel like Frodo Baggins leaving the Shire. Like, I'm off on a journey, but I have no idea what I'm in for. Maybe I'm gonna end up nearly dead on a mountain with the ring trying to take over my brain. I don't know. I may not survive this. We'll see, but I'm up for it. I'm up for the challenge.
And it will take a while, guy, because there's like 50 of these movies. And the rules
Yeah.
of the 1980s sword and sorcery walkthrough are as follows. Okay. So it has to be in English originally. Okay. And because there are surprisingly some Soviet movies in this era, but those are, of course, in Russian. And there's some other, different language films. It has to be. Yeah. So that's really it. It has to be like a feature length film. That is originally produced in English. There were a lot of these. The 1980s were by far like the biggest decade for sword and sorcery films. Now, some of them are going to be more obscure. I think the one we're doing today, which is Hawk the Slayer, is a little bit of the middle of the road. Some of them are going to be quite famous. Obviously, like we're talking about films like Conan the Barbarian starring Arnold Schwarzenegger, or Legend starring Tom Cruise. Labyrinth, these kind of movies that
we already did Willow.
So we already did Willow.
You can go back and watch that review. It's already up there.
That's right. We won't be doing Willow again, but we are going to do them chronologically. At least we'll do all of one year and then move to the next year. So we are starting with 1980, and that is Hawk the Slayer. And Doa, I had so much fun watching this movie. And is it terrible? Yes. But is it insanely entertaining? Yes, it is.
It is just off the bat, regardless of what we both say about this movie for the rest of the time the show is going. Hawk the Slayer is easily one of the most fun times I've ever had watching something for the show. It is in the top 3 for sure. With all the crap we have to endure, we just watched The Acolyte. Like, having to sit through that, watching Hawk is just like, man, this is just some good, like, honest fun. Like, this is just people trying to make a movie. They're doing their best. Some things work, some things really don't work, but I'm loving every single second of it, and I loved every single second of Hawk the Slayer. It was great.
It's one of those things where you can really tell that the people who are making this movie were having a great time. Did they have the biggest budget? Absolutely not. Is it a tightly written script? No, but the actors are clearly having fun in this movie, and the director's clearly having fun, and it is just a blast. It is just a blast.
Yeah, I have a lot of respect for that. I mean, like, there's a lot of movies I think that qualify for this, where I'm willing to give a lot of movies and TV shows a pass if I can be convinced that they're making it with the best intentions at heart, that they're really doing the best they can. They're being creative with the assets that they have. A lot of times you'll see stuff in this movie and it's like, okay, that's a janky looking effect, but like, it was pretty creative for them to use this in this way, right? So, I respect that a lot. And you get a lot of that like passion and heart in this movie, along with a banging disco fantasy soundtrack. So
the soundtrack is like legit good. The soundtrack is legit good to this movie, which is shocking. And I think that comes up that we have to put that out there first, because the soundtrack was done by a guy named Harry Robertson. And Harry Robertson, you'll know if you actually watch our foreplay episode. Richard goes into the history of like British horror films during this era. So if you guys are familiar with Hammer Productions, they were really big in like the 1970s or 60s and 70s, really 60s actually, I should say, 60s and 70s. And Yeah, 50s. Anyway, you get the idea.
They were around for a while, yeah.
Yeah, they were around for a while, and then Amicus production came up in the 1970s when Hammer started to fall off. But go listen to Richard because he's an expert on that kind of stuff. If you want to, it's in our it's the werewolf murder mystery episode.
I've not watched that episode.
The
yet.
Beast Must Die. So it's in our last arc, the Spit Roast arc. Richard chose this 1970s British werewolf murder mystery. It is funny. It's not as fun as this movie, Hawk the Slayer. So would recommend Hawk the Slayer above The Beast Must Die. But he does explain that if you guys are looking for some context around this. And Harry Robertson did do a lot of composing for Hammer films. And so he actually does have quite a lot of different scores that he's done throughout his career. And we get to this one, and it's just such a banger right off the bat, Doa, with the opening credits, like the soundtrack through the opening credits. And like it is like a 1980s electronic soundtrack. That does
it's very
obviously
70s too. It's very disco as well.
It also leans very heavily on Ennio Morricone, which we'll get into later in some of the westerns. But it is like really unique. And even though it could be, you can think of it as slightly derivative. Like it sounds like nothing you've ever heard in a movie before, and it is like one of the best parts of this whole movie.
So I thought to myself at first when I was hearing this, I'm like, this does sound very like derivative because we do have a lot of like, oh, this sounds like a sting right out of Fistful of Dollars or something like that.
Yeah, the leitmotif is
the Western stuff. But at the same time, as I started listening to it more and more, and I've gone back and listened to the soundtrack separately now after watching this film, I'm like, it's more like if you're making like an electronic song or like a rap song and you're sampling something else. You're kind of taking this thing from other music, from other genres, and you're repurposing it to work in your song, and it really does work. So I don't think of it as much as being derivative as much now as I think of it as like an early form of sampling almost. Where I really love the way that they incorporated a lot of this stuff. And again, it's just like, the intent is what gets me, right? The intent is what really makes me enjoy it, where it's like they could have just made another generic fantasy film soundtrack because we got a lot of those in this era, right? And a lot of it was just purely goofy electronic music because not everyone had swapped over to what we now kind of expect from our fantasy movies today, which is what Star Wars was the first, film to really bring this into the mainstream, whereas a full orchestral soundtrack and very dramatic and all that kind of stuff. A lot of it before that was trying to be like kind of like youth dance music almost, So this did keep the beats of the era per se, but it incorporated a lot of other things from other genres.
I mean, it's epic. It sounds epic. Like it is a banger, man.
It
is really weird.
Too.
Yeah, it is really weird, but it is great.
They're like, what genre are you going to really kind of use for this movie's soundtrack? And he just said all of them, and that's what we got. And weirdly, it works. The soundtrack
really does work, guys. Like memorable. This isn't a joke. Like you will find yourself if you watch this movie, you're gonna be like, hell yeah, during the opening credits, just listening to this music. It pumps you up. It's great.
And then you just get the little music stings too, like whenever Hawk shows up on the screen, it's like doo doo doo. It's like straight out of Clint Eastwood,
Yeah. It's straight out. It's straight out of The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. We will get to that. Like obviously, like the leitmotif usage is very reminiscent of like Ennio Morricone and his scores in those films. So let's talk about where did this movie come from? Because the director also is like a B movie king, Terry Marcel. He made this film for £600,000 which is not a big movie, but kind of not nothing in 1980. Not nothing for a B movie, probably.
That is still fairly significant for the time, I suppose, but it's not a huge budget, as you can see too from the movie. But they use every shilling That's for sure. I have to. Are shillings still used in the? I mean, they have the pound, right? Is a shilling a part of a pound? I don't know. I'm American. Sorry, Richard and Thorin. I know you're going to see this and have opinions and feelings about me because of this, but they use every penny, which in British terms is like a half penny, perhaps.
A halfpenny, if you will.
Halfpenny. Who knows?
Every
Whatever,
pence.
whatever they use. A portion of a pound. They use every portion of the pound.
So Terry Marcel did a bunch of other films, including some sci-fi movies like Prisoners of the Lost Universe. He did a Lost Civilization one set in World War II called Jane and the Lost City. So this guy was really like getting out there, making his very quirky B movies especially during the 1980s. And Hawk the Slayer, how did this happen? Because it's such a weird film.
Well, it's interesting, right? Because I looked at this and I was like, was this based on a book or something? Like and it turns out that it was written, by the director and a friend of his, and they had originally started writing it as a historical fiction. It was not supposed to be fantasy initially, but as they were writing it, they just started to decide to incorporate more fantasy elements. And then we got to the point where there's like a mind sword and dwarves and elves and things, and so they went about as far away from historical fiction as you possibly could be, but you can still kind of sense the DNA of that within the film, where it does feel a bit Arthurian to a certain extent, but it feels very rooted in like English, fake history, right? Where you've got, monasteries and these quasi sort of Christian religious motifs and all that. So you can kind of see where it was coming from originally, but it went it totally spiraled wildly out of control after the initial thought process, essentially. But I'm all for it. We would have gotten a much more boring movie, I think, otherwise, and we wouldn't have been watching it because it wouldn't have been fantasy. So I'm glad it went the way it did.
Yeah, it's much better this way. It's much better.
Yeah.
So let us actually break down the plot. First off, you guys should definitely watch this movie. But on the off chance that you're not, we can do a brief overview of the plot before talking about the many, many awesome, hilarious, ridiculous moments that this film contains. So it sets us up, of course, with an opening narration. There was a lot of, we'll get to a lot of the Star Wars inspiration here because this came out 3 years after the original Star Wars: A New Hope, and it is kind of riddled with Star Wars references. And we get this very vague setup at the beginning about a battle between good versus evil. But ultimately, though, this is a story about two brothers attempting to kill each other.
Yeah, it is. And the thing that I want to shout out though for the intro though too is that like if you listen to it by the end of it for some reason, the narrator, he starts out kind of low energy and then he just keeps getting lower energy over the course of it to the end when he gets to the point like legions of darkness stalk the land. He's like just practically whispering by the end of it. And I'm like, dude, just bring it up a little bit. This is the beginning of your movie.
This is a story of heroic deeds and the bitter struggle for the triumph of good over evil, and of a wondrous sword wielded by a mighty hero when the legions of darkness stalk the land.
But you don't see a lot of intro reads like that go lower energy as the read continues. That's bucking the trend for sure.
Shout out Princess Irulan from the 1984 Dune movie who forgot to tell us the information.
I almost forgot.
I almost forgot. Here's the thing that you really need to know, audience.
That's right. Yeah, this is one of the great movie intros of all time, for the fact that it does kind of lose interest in itself by the end of it, which is not a great start to your film. Yeah.
If you guys haven't seen, you can go check out our Dune 1984 review when you can see Princess Irulan fade in and fade out. Forget to tell the audience very crucial details about Arrakis.
I'm sure they'll clip in the intro to this one too, where you can hear, the guy sort of start to, just be ready to set the script down and walk away by the end of reading the intro. He's like, legions of darkness stalk the land. Is it lunch? Yeah.
Well, you could probably do it better though. You're a professional play-by-play caster. Why don't you give it a shot?
Well, I'll give it a shot if you give it a shot.
All right, good. We'll both do it.
Okay, all right. Who wants to start? Do you want to start or should I
I'll start.
Okay, go ahead. Give me your
This-
reading of the intro of Hawk the Slayer.
Okay.
All right.
This is a story of heroic deeds and the bitter struggle for the triumph of good over evil, and of a wondrous sword wielded by a mighty hero when the legions of darkness stalk the land.
All right. Yeah, I like it. I felt the energy. I felt the energy. All right. I'm gonna go a little different route. We're gonna go. All right. I'm gonna hold on. I'm gonna summon my wizened wizard voice. All right. This is a story of heroic deeds and the bitter struggle for the triumph of good over evil, and of a wondrous sword wielded by a mighty hero when the legions of darkness stalk the land.
Very good. It was like a growly
Thanks.
Deckard Cain. Very nice.
Yeah. I died in an in-engine cutscene. How is that fair?
Damn you, Chris Metzen.
Oh, why? Oh well. Anyway, moving on. It's a great intro. I think we did a better job personally, but that's I may be biased. But so we enter the a view of what we're going to see a lot of in this film, which is a horse walking slowly through a forest. That's our opening shot. Get used to it. We're going to see a lot of horses moving through forests, usually in slow motion. And then
sometimes you'll see double because they do very extended dissolve cuts.
Yeah, they love the dissolves. And then we get to an old man that we've never seen before staring into a pink bubble bath, is what it looks like, and he looks sad. And that, Monty, is when our drama truly begins, isn't it? That's where we kick it all off.
Yes, I mean, I love how this film wastes none of my time, Doa. You know, they don't waste my time with a bunch of garbage filler.
That is true.
It literally is old man in perfectly gold room, which is very similar to the Dune 1984 Harkonnen green room, but gold. And it has it also just has a bath in it. There are a lot of parallels between this and the David Lynch Dune. And so just an old man sitting in the gold room with a sword on the wall, and then all of a sudden his son Zoltan comes in and just shanks him because he wants the power.
The ancient power must never fall into the hands of the devil's agents.
Father! Father!
And let the secret die.
Yeah, but Dad,
what power is it? We never really find out, actually.
It's well, we know it's a rock. We know it's a glowing rock because Zoltan shanks Dad and then leaves. And then the other son happens to get there just in time. This is our titular Hawk, who has not yet become a Slayer, but will by the end of the movie have slayed many people, some with questionable intent. But we'll get to that. We'll get to that later. Either way, Dad likes him, so he gives him the stone. But before he gives him the stone, he has to give it to him in a sword, which leads to one of I think our favorite special effects in the entire film, which is where the sword is like a fist. It's like a fist sword at the beginning, right? For the pommel, and then it opens up and he puts the sword in there, and the hand is clearly, they cut away and it's clearly a glove in a silver, or a hand in a silver glove. It slowly closes around the stone, the glowing stone, and the best part is they add the sound, like this metal creaking sound effect, so it goes.
The last elfin mindstone.
It's not just a rock, it's an elven mindstone. And what the elven mindstone does is it allows him to be Luke Skywalker and use the Force to get his sword. That is, as far as I can tell, that's the extent of his powers. But Doa, crucially, when he's tied up, he can't use it for some reason later in the movie. You would think that when he was tied up, that being able to summon a sword with your mind would be incredibly useful. But no, it doesn't happen. So if you were waiting for that power to actually be useful at any point in time, please know that it's not.
He can only use his mind to make the sword come to his hand if there's no other obstructions in the way or anything like that. It just goes in a straight line at about chest height, and if that can't happen, His arms to the side, no luck. No.
And also, why is it useful? Because anytime that he actually uses that power, he could just bend over and pick up the sword instead, and
Hey,
it doesn't
sometimes he's
actually
like-
give him power.
Sometimes he's like 3 or 4 steps away from the sword, but he clearly, this is clearly a party trick or something to impress the ladies, maybe. But you know, it's clearly not terribly functional. But it does give us one of the best like heroic weapon names of all time, which is the mind sword, which is just like it's just great. As soon as like they were like this sword is the mind sword, I was like, I love this film. I'm in it. I'm in it for the long haul.
The mind sword is now yours, my son.
So apparently this is what the two brothers were fighting over, guys, was that
Yeah.
Zoltan comes in and he's like, I need this great power that you have, father, give it to me. And he's like, no. And then he gets shanked. And then he's like, and then while his father is dying, Hawk comes in, he's like, and then his dad's like, here, have this immense power. And then you look at it and you're like, wait, he can just move the sword around? Like it comes to his hand? That's the power?
You know, maybe it's like deceptively short, or not short, sharp, deceptively sharp, because and it must be deceptively sharp because when you see the edge of this sword in close-ups is very flat and blunt and does not look sharp at all. Watch for that if you watch this movie. Close-ups of the sword, you're like, oh my gosh, they didn't even try to make the sword look sharp. It is a very flat edged sword. But you know, then we find out that Zoltan is also called the Dark One. Which props to this movie for thinking up a totally original moniker for your villain, the Dark One. That's never been done before. That is as unique as it gets, Monte Cristo. Never before have I heard a villain in a fantasy context referred to as the Dark One. So well done there.
Zoltan, the Dark One.
Yeah. Shout out to the Wheel of Time.
Yeah, or you know, Harry Potter, or any of the Dark Side. Anyway, moving on. Meanwhile, a different character who shall become main, Ranulph, shows up at a monastery or nunnery, convent.
A convent. There you go.
Get thee to a convent, Ranulph. He's missing a hand. His village has been beaten up by some guys, which turns out to be Zoltan, of course. His hand is missing, yet he has a strangely long, bendy forearm where his hand used to be. No comment there.
I have to interrupt you for a second.
Uh-huh.
Who names one of their kids Zoltan and the other one Hawk?
Well, see, that's what I always wondered. Like, is Hawk actually his name, or is he just like, I just want to be known by my gamer ID, you know? Did he have a different name that was really embarrassing or something? Like, you know, Francel Tuft or something? Like, was it Francel
I just want to know the like.
No,
I have to question the wisdom of this father who, you know, fine. If you want to name one of your kids Zoltan or one of them Hawk, fine. But why would you name one Zoltan and one Hawk? There's no synergy there. What the hell is that?
He just wanted different types of fantasy names, but I think Hawk is a moniker. I don't think Hawk is his real name. I think we just don't know what his real name is. I think of like Cobra Kai, right? Where we have one of the characters who's known as Hawk, but that's not his real name. He just calls himself Hawk because it's a cool name, right? So I'm pretty sure that this is the same type of thing. Even though I have no evidence to back that up, I would like to believe that his real name is not Hawk.
Next, you'll be telling me the elf isn't named Crow and they're not forming some sort of weird bird gang.
What's funny is the actor refers to his character as Bowman. If you look at interviews and stuff too, so I don't even know if he knows what the name of his character is, but yeah, it is kind of Crow.
To whom do I have the pleasure of addressing myself?
Crow.
All right. Anyway, continue. So Ranulph shows up to the convent.
Oh, yeah.
Missing a hand.
He's like,
because
oh, no.
of the violence in his village perpetrated by the evil Zoltan.
Yeah, he's just basically there to tell us, hey, Zoltan's out there. He's doing bad stuff. The nuns are like, oh no, let's nurse him back to health. That's what we do here. We're nuns. We help out. And then we cut to it's a very short scene, and then we cut to what ends up being, I think, a very important scene. We learn a little bit about a little teaser of Voltan's background and his, this malady that's afflicting him, right? He's got one eye covered, we know, and something is bothering that eye, right? But don't worry, because he's meeting up with some wizards who are going to zap it with a crystal, which looks like it hurts, but also helps. Yeah.
Steel yourself. Your face will not pay me for a while, but you will need the crystal again.
Who are the wizards? We never
Who
find
knows?
out. Don't worry about it.
That was for the sequel, man. That was sequel material. Hawk
So
2.
Voltan, basically the thrust of this story, guys, is Voltan then goes to the convent. He kidnaps the abbess, okay?
Yes,
and then he tries to ransom the abbess to 2,000 for 2,000 gold pieces. So the rest of this film is basically Seven Samurai, where Hawk has to go and collect all of his friends in order to get some gold to then pay the ransom to his own brother to retrieve the abbess. That's the plot, guys.
And I'd like to assume that Hawk never planned on paying it in the first place, but that's our plot, and we're just gonna go with it here. Which
by the
go
way
ahead.
doesn't make any sense, because they repeatedly say that if we give him the gold, then he's not going to give you the abbess back, right?
Yeah.
And so why did we bother getting the gold when we already know that we have to kill him
Well,
to
because
get
Hawk
the
and
abbess back?
Hawk saw that as an opportunity to be like, well, no, I'm gonna keep the gold. I know my brother. I know Voltan's gonna just double cross him, so I'm gonna be there. We're gonna collect the gold, and we're just gonna kill Voltan, and then we're gonna just
Why
take
not
the
just
gold
kill
home.
Voltan and save the abbess and then go get some gold?
Because you might, I don't know at all. I don't have an answer for that. Because nuns need help. Some nuns need help, and Hawk is there to help. Hawk helps women in distress of any religious background, as we find out when our first scene that introduces us to him after he gains the mind sword is to save a witch known as Witch she's about to be burned, which is something that often happens to witches in history, right? So this is our start of our many scenes of giving the heroes things to fight that are not the main villain, to show us that they are cool or show us that they are powerful. And this type of scene, we'll get into it as we go through, happens not just once, but 7 times throughout the film. We have this exact type of scene. So the first one is, keep this in mind as we go through it. Hawk fights some thugs to save a witch, right? These thugs have no chance. We're like, whoa, Hawk is so strong. He's got the mind sword. We're going to see this a lot. So get used to it.
Also, more Star Wars references here, because he starts deflecting arrows with his sword, like blaster bolts in this scene. Maybe that's
that
what the mind
happens.
sword does.
Maybe. I mean, it gets in the minds of the archers so that they miss.
They just
Who
hit his
knows?
sword instead of him. And then by the way, this is also the start of every character dies because they have no budget by getting sliced across the belly with zero blood. But everybody dies the same way, which is the same like horizontal slash across the belly, which they show from the back, and the actor just doubles over on a blood sword and goes, ugh, and then falls over and dies.
We call this LARP death. You've died as if you were playing in a LARPing situation where you've been hit by the weapon, thus you have to be dead. Yep.
If you told me that this was just a recording of a LARP, I would actually believe you.
I would definitely believe you too. With some of the acting in this film, I would definitely believe you. That said, on the acting front for a moment, we do have an Oscar winner in this movie, don't we?
Yeah,
We have
Jack Palance is in this
Jack
as
Palance,
Zoltan,
the
who
villain
is actually
here.
quite good. He's quite entertaining in this movie.
Wizard! Help me!
You promised me all in return for my sword arm.
And
Yeah.
probably I mean, he's been in dozens of films, but I think when I think about him, I think about Shane, the classic '50s Western, because he's a very memorable character. But I mean, my God, he was in films for decades, right? Absolute legend, and he just happens to be the villain in this.
Yeah, I think of Angel's Revenge, which was a Charlie's Angels ripoff film that he also played the villain in. When I think of Jack Palance, just throwing that out there. Not City Slickers, none of that stuff. Yeah. He did do, to Jack's credit, in a somewhat awkward Oscar acceptance speech in when he won his Oscar for being in City Slickers, he did one-arm push-ups at age 72 on the stage, which is actually pretty. That's pretty impressive.
Chad.
Yeah, I know, right? That's our Jack Palance, right? He's great. And he also says things like, "No, I like a guy with spirit."
No, I like a man with spirit. But remember this and remember it well. Zoltan owns everything. The table, the chairs, the very food you eat. I own everything, including your useless life. Remember it well. Your friend has lost his appetite, it seems.
Stuff like that. It's great. He has some awesome lines in this one.
Yeah, and also the witch is what I found funny. If you guys have seen Rocky Horror Picture Show, the witch is the witch. The witch is played by the same woman who plays Magenta, the like woman in the French maid's outfit in the Rocky Horror Picture Show, the '70s one with Tim Curry. Fabulous.
Yeah, I was about to say moving up in the world, but I guess she made this after Rocky Horror Picture
Yeah,
Show.
Patricia
Never mind.
Patricia
Never mind.
Quinn.
Moving up in fun, down in film quality, maybe. But it was interesting to see her in this. What I realized, I was like, that John Terry guy, the guy who plays Hawk, looks very familiar to me. And I'm like, where have I seen this guy before? And I looked it up and I realized he's Jack's dad in Lost, which ends up being a fairly major character in that series. So, wow, talk about going from Hawk the Slayer to another, fantasy story, I suppose, in Lost as well. Interestingly enough.
Yeah, so
Also,
I mean, surprisingly for such a small movie, the surprisingly like accomplished cast, I would say, for this one.
One last bit of actor trivia in this. If you were like me at the beginning of the movie when you saw Zoltan and his dad interacting, and you're like, these people look like they're the same age. Well, in fact, they pretty much were, because Ferdy Mayne, the guy who played the old king, is only 3 years older than Jack Palance. When they were filming this, I mean, I assume that age difference didn't change over the years, but yeah, so they basically were the same age. So that king, man, going out there and procreating at age 3, that is some fantasy right there. That is some unbelievable stuff happening in this film.
Very good, very good. All right, so at this point in time, the rest of the film is it's basically a bunch of vignettes where we collect characters like we saw. I mean, obviously famous in Kurosawa Seven Samurai. We talked about this and all the Seven Samurai derivatives that we have out there, aka The Magnificent Seven, A Bug's Life, and now Rebel Moon. If you guys want to hear us talk about this in Rebel Moon, we talk about how derivative this is in Rebel Moon, but I like it in this movie, Doa, because first off, it wastes none of our time. Whenever they need a fat Deus Ex Machina to come through, we just get the witch to provide absolutely everything that we need. She is like the ultimate Deus Ex Machina. It is crazy how she just solves all their problems. So she just shows up and invites Hawk into her cave. It sounds like a euphemism for other things, but it's not. Trust me.
Invite the Hawk into your cave. Yeah.
And she then places neon lit up hula hoops around him and then teleports him to his friends, the giant, the elf, and the dwarf, who are apparently all the last of their kind going extinct. And we get one vignette with each of these characters, which I think are pretty entertaining and pretty funny, and also like very, very fun insights into their characters.
The funny thing is when you compare the way that this movie gathers its party versus the way that the Rebel Moon film gathers its party, it's like shocking how you just find more evidence of how badly Rebel Moon did things, where they managed to make it really, really long without really adding any character development at all in the theatrical cut. I'm not talking about the director's cut that out now. I'm not going to talk about that. In fact, But in this movie, it's just, send the teleporter. We'll send you over there. Quick humorous vignette kind of, and then we're back. Then we'll teleport both of you back. How are we doing it? Who knows? Are you really familiar with this sort of magic, Hawk? Who cares? Who's doing it? Why are none of your friends
I told you, this
surprised
movie
to see
doesn't
you
waste
show
your
up like
time.
this?
It doesn't waste your time.
It's so expedient. They were like, all right, we got to get this thing done. How are we going to get him to gather all the party? Do we have lots of walking scenes? And they're like, well, we could, but we could just have him teleport there from a cave and then teleport everybody back. So why not? But my question for you, Monty, is why go through all the efficiency processes in gathering the party when we have scenes like the one right before the party gathering, part of the film, where Ranulph needs to get rescued by some bandits. Again, our second, hero fights the bandits to show what the hero can do. And it's Ranulph getting like tortured, interspersed with like 30-second cuts of Hawk riding a horse in slow motion. It's slow motion every time through the forest.
Silence, scum. A contest.
So clearly they don't mind showing travel in a slow fashion in this film. So why do we not get any of that when we get to these the party gathering vignettes? I don't get it.
You're not even talking about where they go through the spooky evil forest with the
right.
crazy puppets that
puppets,
look at them, and he's like, "Stay in my light or you'll die," and they're just like literally in like a spider web tunnel going through the forest.
So we're at the point in the film where they're just like, okay, we've got enough of the fantasy long travel stuff. Forget that. No more travel shots. We're just gonna, teleport everybody around now.
Yeah, exactly. Because they did the establishing of where they were. They showed the same forest 15 times already. And so we just now get cave shots of teleporting to what is the same forest, but maybe different angles of it.
I think the horse rentals ran out. I think that's what it was. They shot the horses as much as they could. The
horse budget ran dry.
Yeah, they did as much as with the horses as they could. They rode them around in the forest. They really stretched their dollar there, or their pound
think about
there.
Think about it, Doa. We would have had to rent extra horses too, if we had more people. Whereas this way, we just teleport them to exactly where they need to be, and it works out. But I think it's mega because you have the crazy hula hoops that are going around him and teleporting him everywhere.
Yeah.
But it is expedient. And by the way, I was grateful because I didn't want to see any more like riding through the jungle shot or riding through the forest shots. So I thought this was fun and actually improved the film dramatically. And we get really good vignettes of these characters too. They're actually like super funny a lot of the time. So we get the giant with the cart and the guy who doesn't want to pay him for repairing his cart, and then the giant has to just like fight a bunch of dudes who are angry, I guess, that he isn't repairing the cart for free or getting fleeced by somebody. We get the elf one where he has the fun bow competition where they try and turn on him at the end.
My arrow hit first.
The devil it did. My arrow left the bow first.
And the dwarf one is legitimately like the dwarf scenes are generally funny, but the dwarf scene where he's just he's in trouble, just like tied to a raft where they're shooting flaming arrows at him while chanting and missing is funny. It's like, oh, dwarf, what trouble did you get into with these religious zealots? And they're like, it will be an honor for you to die this way. And he's like, no, don't kill me.
Oh.
Cut me loose, ducks!
Be still, ugly one. It is a great honor to you to die this way.
Yeah, it's fun. It's fun. It also gives us a few more of the scenes that I was talking about. We've got, which also interspersed with this, we also get a cutaway to Zoltan and his sons, and they run into some guys just chilling on a park bench are at a picnic table and they're rude, and so Zoltan and his son kill one and cut the tongue out of the other one, right? So it's just another, hey, here's some extras for our villains to beat up this time to show you they're serious. Then we have, the giant fights some thugs because of a cart repair bill. We have Crow and Hawk fight some guys with a bow contest, and we have them fight some religious zealots to get the dwarf free, right? So we've got 4 more of these scenes where it's like, hey, here's some extras to beat up on so that our heroes or villains can do cool things without having to actually meet each other in the story yet.
Yeah, and because this goes under Baldur's Gate rules where you must gather your party before venturing forth. Once the party has been gathered, they venture forth and they go beat up some slavers to get the gold, because they rob the slavers. I do think there's a really fun scene in here where they get the main hunchback slaver and then they tie his giant mace to the tree with the rope over his head, and they put the rope in his mouth. They're like, you better not say anything or this giant mace is going to crush your skull, fall on your head. And he's like, I hate you. And then it just crushes the skull. It's fun. Like, it's a good scene.
Yeah.
Our thanks, brother, for the bountiful gifts you have bestowed upon us. Some people can never keep their mouths shut.
But I was like, man, our heroes are really bloodthirsty. Like, because remember, right before that, they kill literally everybody. And like, yeah, sure, the one hunchback is like a slaver, but how do we know everyone that works for him is also equally invested in the enslaving, right? They could just be like down on their luck mercenaries who are just trying to feed a wife and a child at home. Maybe they were pressed into service because they owe the slavers some money and they don't want to become slaves themselves. We don't know all their backstories. All we know is that they come in and get slaughtered by Hawk and all his buddies.
Cut them down!
So I'm like,
well,
man,
at least Hawk and Zoltan can agree on just randomly killing slavers.
Yeah, you just show up. And
they both love doing that.
By the way, Hawk the slaying is the answer.
We're only told that Zoltan is bad, by the way, and Zoltan is actually killing criminals in part of this. So is he bad?
Yes, he is, because you're forgetting one very important thing that's happening throughout all these scenes we're talking about, Monty, and that is the flashbacks of Zoltan and young Hawk, even though they're the same age, and Hawk's girlfriend Elaine, who is going to be married to him, where Elaine and Hawk clearly are an item. You know, Eliana, right?
I think
I see it and I think Elaine. Eliana, you're right, Eliana. And then Zoltan shows up and is like, "Hey, she should have been my girlfriend." And I'm gonna actually end up in, as these flashbacks progress, end up, shooting Hawk and killing her, right? So no, Zoltan is not a good guy. He thought he could just come and like claim Hawk's fiance. No way. And I gotta say though, we talk a lot about how flashbacks are used poorly in shows. I think those flashbacks were used quite well in this movie.
Yes,
because they give you little tidbits about Zoltan's and Hawk's backstory as the movie goes through, so that, by the end of it, we really understand that the conflict between these two brothers goes beyond, hey, he's got the mind sword and his brother wants it. It goes deeper than that. There's a woman at the center of all this too.
Except neither of them is capable of following the bros before hoes rule. So it gets them actually. If you think about it, because neither of them can just be like bros before hoes. Now the entire countryside is plunged into a brutal and violent conflict.
I guess you could see it that way.
Also,
or Zoltan could have just been okay with his brother, kind of actually having a real relationship with this person and just gone on with his life. Maybe this is actually Zoltan being evil.
Also, why is Zoltan evil? We never figure that out either. Why is he consorting with dark wizards? Who knows? But in this, Eliana, by the way, love the makeup. Just too much rouge, like actual clown makeup on her, looking seriously unattractive in this film. And then at the end, when but also, she gives him this cross medallion because this is like Christian coded to the absolute max. Not only do they just mention the devil in this movie for no reason, they have like the monks and the nuns that are just obviously Christian. And Eliana gives him a gold cross necklace to protect him. And what happens is when he's aiming, by the way, it didn't protect her. When Zoltan is aiming his crossbow,
it only works for
Hawk,
guys. Sorry,
it blinds him. It blinds him, and then he accidentally shoots her. So what a piece of shit cross necklace that is.
I guess. I think it's another little piece of the original story where it was supposed to be historical fiction. In a historical England where things like Christianity really existed. So I see where it comes from, but what I think is hilarious about the end of it is that it's a cross, but at the end it's got like a little knife hidden in it, where it's like, maybe that fact would have come in handy during the whole conflict with Zoltan. Like when he was grabbing her and roughing her up, couldn't she have used a little cross dagger on him? Through any of that? Couldn't anyone?
I bet. I also bet. I don't know. Jesus probably could have used a little dagger in the real cross during his crucifixion to escape, but.
Maybe. I don't know. I wasn't there, but it does make you wonder, if the dagger could have been, that information could have been used a little bit earlier, right? Unless she just didn't tell him. She was like, oh, maybe this hawk guy's gonna end up being a creep too. I better not tell him there's a little blade in the cross. I might need to use it on him. It's like the hat pins they used to have in like the late 800s, 1900s. Women had like really big hairstyles and hats and things, and they had these long pins to secure it all, but it also doubled as a self-defense mechanism. You could pull it out and poke it, to the extent that I had read that they had to legally limit the length of these hairpins because they were just getting too dangerous. Right.
That's
people get out there getting stabbed with hairpins, I guess. So yeah. Well, so moving on, they decide that the best answer is to steal the gold from the slavers, which they do. So then they get the gold from that too. And then when I say steal the gold from the slavers, what I really mean is kill all of the slavers and take the gold. That's more robbery than theft when it comes down to it. And so then they have the gold and they go back to the convent. And they're like, well, Zoltan's gonna betray you. And oh wait, we haven't talked about Drogo yet. We gotta talk about Zoltan's son Drogo, don't we? Because
go for it.
He has some of the best lines in the entire film, right? Drogo is Zoltan's son, and he just wants to be loved / just wants to find ways to stand out and impress his father and be his own. But he gets driven to the point where he wants to, he's in conflict with his father. His dad won't let him go and raid this town or that town. He makes him just sit at home, sit in the tent, and just, I don't know, do whatever he does in the tent. So he gets mad. And he gets so mad. He says a line that no one in the universe will ever understand. He talks about how he's going to beat Zoltan and be powerful. And he goes, and then Zoltan, we shall see who is Lord of the Dance.
Not only will I bring back the head of this hawk, but I'll have the gold as well. And then, Zoltan, we'll see who is the Lord of the Dance.
Cue actual Lord of the Dance, by the way, in the video right now. And where does this come from, Mod? Do you have any idea? Do you have any? So I have no idea what this could be referencing within the context of the film.
Non sequitur, because there is no reference to any Lord of the Dance in the film. It's not clear that Zoltan is Lord of the Dance or that he seeks the title of Lord of the Dance. It's never mentioned before or after at any point in time. So what the fuck is this line? I have no idea.
He's just Lord of the Dance. Yeah. It's great. But Drogo really does give us like all the best lines in this film, I feel like. There's one at the end where Drogo comes in and is about to be a fight, and I'll let you do this one because I know you love this line specifically. So go ahead, take it away.
I am no messenger, but I will give you a message of death.
I am no messenger, but I will give you a message. The message of death.
The message of death.
Which, by the way, was in much later on, if you guys know the British band The Darkness, which is kind of like a modern hair metal band, they're famous for particularly the song "I Believe in a Thing Called Love." They did a song much later than that called "Nothing's Gonna Stop Us," and they sample that part of Hawk the Slayer.
Mm-hmm.
I am no messenger, but I give you a message of death at the start of their songs. You guys can go listen to that as well. It's wonderful.
Just break down that line for a second, verbatim. I am no messenger, but I will give you a message, the message of death. Well, it's if you say you're not a messenger, but then right away you immediately state you will be giving a message. There, by definition, you are a messenger, but the message is death. Okay, so
but it's not a message, so it's not a messenger. He's not a messenger.
Yeah, but he said it was. He misrepresented himself. Drogo needs to kind of watch out for this stuff, I guess. Drogo is also the guy who randomly just calls people a dork in this movie. He's kind of like a 90s high school bully in an 80s fantasy world, is really what it comes down to. He's like a Biff Tannen, although Biff Tannen was like a 1950s high school bully in a 1980s movie world. He's like the guy in Encino Man, who's a 1990s bully in a 1990s high school world. I rest my case. Checkmate, atheists.
Terrible. So those are some of the quality lines from this film that you guys can enjoy. So if eventually, the plot goes into it's basically like The Last Stand at the Alamo, except it's in a Christian but not really Christian convent, right? And so we get all of the characters there. They lure Zoltan back in with the promise of his 2,000 gold pieces, and then they have an epic convent battle where our heroes get captured because the giant who's the one on watch while they're sleeping gets drugged, and then Zoltan gets in and captures them. Then they get freed, then they escape, and then they re-attack the convent in order to save the nuns. So it's like, one party is defending the Alamo, but then they switch places, and then the other party is defending the Alamo.
Yeah, you got to take turns. You got to get the most out of that set, and they really do. But I love when Zoltan rocks up to the convent the first time, and he's outside, and he goes, "This place shall be wiped from the face of the land." And
this place shall be wiped from the face of the land.
It's like, well, because it's awkward to say face of the land, because normally you'd say like from the face of the earth, right? But, again, because now we're in a fantasy world, are we on Earth? We haven't done enough world building really to know in Hawk the Slayer. So I guess we're just going to say face of the land. That's good enough. But, it's important to note, too, that the nun the giant gets drugged because one of the nuns betrays them. It's a nun that's been naysaying the entire time, being like, yeah, sure, we can trust Zoltan. He gave his word, right? And nobody lies. So clearly, we give
he
the
seems
gold,
like a very
we get our
trustworthy kidnapper.
Yeah, that's how it works. Sure, he kidnapped and threatened us, but that's the extent of it. He's a good man aside from that. Yeah.
He just wants the gold. No more murdering. Just like he definitely didn't murder a bunch of other people already around you in villages. Yeah. Because remember that he came in and actually murdered everybody in the village except for Ranulph, who they saved.
Right. You literally got a story. The movie kicks off almost with the story of Zoltan slaughtering a village. So I don't know. She's just living in she's living in her own little world where everybody's nice. But as you mentioned, everyone's captured, right? And then Zoltan does a stand-up comedy routine for his little troupe where he goes around to each member of the party individually and makes jokes about them and then laughs, which is amazing because he's clearly not funny at all. And it's like, you don't want to have your main villain do like a stand-up comedy routine at the end. That goes beyond gloating. It doesn't work out.
Little men with pointed ears. I shall trim them for you later. And the giant, felled by a pinch of powder. You will give us great sport before you die.
But he goes up to the dwarf and he makes fun of the dwarf the most, we'll say. He jokes about the most. And the dwarf manages to kick him in the face. which is great news for our party because Zoltan needs to go back to the wizards to get another like crystal spa treatment, basically. But it's bad news for the dwarf because he dies.
Zoltan! You will die by my hand!
He gets shanked. That scene really reminded me of Leslie Nielsen in Surf Ninjas, by
Yes.
the way. And if you haven't seen our episode on that, go watch the Surf Ninjas episode of Nerd Legion also. But it really, really reminded me of Leslie Nielsen in Surf Ninjas.
You know, similar with a dude with one eye covered by some sort of mechanical apparatus. Yeah. Yeah, there you go. Yeah. And so this all leads to an opportunity for Deus Ex Witch to return yet again and save us with I don't know, fluorescent bouncy balls and confetti and snow is what comes through
And
the door.
silly string.
And silly string, right. It is a children's birthday party, and that is what Hawk the Slayer needs right now to save the day. But you also get these great like pew 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 sound effects.
We'll get to it. We'll get to that. Hold up on that.
Oh,
one.
okay. All right.
Basically, they come in and this movie ends with them defeating Zoltan, but he actually gets carried off by the Dark Wizard to, I guess, be resurrected for a sequel
obviously.
that never happens.
They have use of him yet.
They have use of him yet.
We have further need of you, Dark One. Your sleep of death will not last long.
Who are the Dark? And at the end of the movie, guys, we're just left with more questions. So Zoltan dies. Hawk lives. Some of the members of his party live, but we don't get any answers. We don't get any answers. No. Who are the Dark Wizards with the crystal? What are they trying to do? What is the evil? Who is the devil? We get no answers for anything that this movie says.
Talk like a robot?
Why does the elf crow talk like a robot?
I don't know what the direction was on that. They were like, I guess speak really haltingly and don't change your tone. And so he's like, there are 4 bandits coming towards this position. Beep boop.
You should have given him the gold. He would have returned the abbess and left us to live in peace.
The peace of the dead.
It's like they edited it out whenever he did the robot sound to go with that.
I think it's a Spock reference. That's my guess. I think they're trying to make him like a Vulcan from the Star Trek, the original series. Yeah, that's my guess, man.
I guess, but yeah, like he's supposed to be very like emotionless,
Yes.
But it ends up being like, is this guy doing a robot impression? Like, is he supposed to be an android or something? Like, you really wonder that while you're watching this, That is true. So yeah, so then Hawk and the Giant are the only two hanging out at the end. The Giant's gonna go off and be a bodyguard somewhere, but then Hawk is like, we could go to the Southlands and chase after the wizards because the wizards are apparently the biggest, baddest guys. And we know, the audience, that they took Zoltan's body with them to resurrect him too. So that's where our journey will certainly take us. And so then they ride off, and that's the end of the plot. That's the end of the film. Yep.
And you were telling me before this that apparently they made like a follow-up comic about this that apparently deals with this.
When it came to
it was written by Garth Ennis, and Garth Ennis is very famous for writing Preacher and The Boys, so it may not be crap.
Right. So I mean, I am curious about that. It was in this Judge Dredd magazine, from what I read, back in 2022. It's only 2 years ago, actually. They did this comic sequel to the movie, but this movie is like nicher than niche because it didn't even get a U.S. theatrical release. It only released in the UK, I believe, theatrically, and then it released on TV in America in 1982. So it didn't even get a real theatrical release. So then the idea that a follow-up would happen, on that front too, like it never made any movies in theaters here, it just never happened. Now, there was also a Kickstarter in 2015, believe it or not, to kickstart a Hawk the Slayer sequel, where the original writer-director, Terry Marcel, was spearheading this along with the guy who played Crow, the elf. They were both in the Kickstarter video. You can go, the page is still up. You can go watch it. where they said that they had raised $4.5 million and they just needed the last 500,000 from Kickstarter to have what they needed to make this movie. And they started the Kickstarter. They raised like about, as of, you know, when it shut down, they had $27,000 that they had raised.
No, they were so far away. Damn it.
I know. And the updates stopped almost immediately on this Kickstarter too. It's like they just saw that they weren't getting anything right away and they just gave up because they stopped posting things like 2 weeks after the Kickstarter went up. And there's lots of comments where like, are they ever going to post an update? What's happening with this? And apparently they just tried it and abandoned it, which makes you wonder, you know, did the other money really exist? You know, if you had 4.5 million and all you needed was just a little 500K to really make the film, you'd think, you know, given the original budget of the film was only around 600,000 pounds, you would be able to make something with 4.5 million, right? So I kind of am calling, I'm going to call suspected shenanigans on the amount of money that was actually there when the Kickstarter went up, because that went mysteriously silent. And from what I know, we haven't heard anything from that since. So that was there was an attempt at least to get a sequel made that did not work out very well. And then, yeah, I guess this comic in 2022, I'll have to go check it out. But aside from that, you know, so far, no chance for a cinematic Hawk sequel.
I
No
do
more
want
Hulk
to
sequels either too, please.
I do want to talk
there.
about some of my favorite special effects from this film, Doa.
Man, let's hear it.
Like, I loved the transportation hula hoops with the neon lights. Like, honestly, they used a lot of what I appreciate is that it is aesthetically consistent in terms of its visuals. Like, the magical elements in this are what we would look at today and say, oh, these would be used with LEDs, but they look pretty good for the time without LED technology in 1980. You know, LEDs are obviously amazing pieces of tech, but we didn't get them until relatively recently, especially at the, you know, level of production and like accessibility that we would have seen. So a lot of the effects in here it's the transportation hula hoops, or as you referenced earlier, when they're reattacking the convent and the doors blow open and a million bouncy balls just like shoot into the room, which is so funny. And then it has sci-fi laser pew, 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 sound effects with it. I was dying laughing during this, but it looks pretty good.
Yeah, it's clearly just a bunch of, clearly they had a big group of people just throwing bouncy balls into the room, just chucking them as fast as they could. And then they blow a bunch of like confetti and Hollywood snow, fake snow in there. But yeah, the bouncy balls are bouncing around. Again, like it's a kid's birthday party or something. I was trying to figure out how they made everything light up because I don't think it was rotoscoped. I don't think this film had the time or the budget to do that like they did in Star Wars, where you go in and you manually paint every frame basically. But I suspect that a lot of this either had reflective tape applied to it in the case of like the hula hoops that you then shine a light off and it makes this bright feedback into the camera lens, or, you know, with the bouncy balls, it could just be fluorescent paint that was, these could just be fluorescent bouncy balls. And then you just shine a fluorescent light on it and it doesn't mess with the other stage lighting and it creates a shining effect. That's just guesses for me, because I was curious how they did that. But yeah, it is a lot of supposedly glowing bouncy balls flying around. That's our magic.
I love when the witch shows up at the convent and opens the door and just silly strings somebody.
Yeah. It's like the end of a kid's movie. I don't know. It's bizarre.
The other effect that is just in there for no discernible reason is that when in the beginning of the film and all of those extended horseback riding scenes, I call it drunken horseback riding, because it looks like I'm drunk and seeing double, because they do all these dissolves on top of each other. Now, what is this supposed to represent? I have no idea, but it does make me think that I'm just like drunkenly watching a man in fantasy garb ride a horse around a forest.
I mean, there's so many parallels between this and Rebel Moon, actually, and that director's, you know, original fantasy vision. There is copious uses of slow motion here. Although I will say, in every category, this movie is better than Rebel Moon. Don't get me wrong. This movie, again, let me say it again, in every category is better than Rebel Moon.
True.
I just want to emphasize that before we go any further. But yeah, the slow motion horse riding, again, like especially in the lead up to the Ranulph rescue, there's so many shots of just a horse close up, slow motion, going around a tree or something like that in a forest. I I liked that this movie had a lot of the trappings of 80s fantasy as well, where you just have like random skeletons hanging in trees, dark forests, you know, with like big spider webs and all that. There's a lot of
Bunch
really
of
great
candles in the
classic.
trees just waiting to start a forest
Oh,
fire,
I
but there
love
to
it.
show some occult stuff. It's
I
fun.
love it.
It's really
Yeah,
fun.
very straight up, very classic 70s, 80s fantasy trappings, right? The way the castles look. And this is a serious, impressive thing to me. Shout out to the map paintings that we see throughout this film. There's a lot of really great landscape map paintings. I'm not even
Yeah.
this isn't
I mean,
a joke or a bit.
I
I think
mean,
there's a
like
lot
the
of really
Willow
fun,
ones are
good
obviously
stuff.
much more realistic. If you guys go watch our Willow one, like these
Sure,
are
yeah.
very, very obviously paintings, but they are fun. They are fun.
I think there's a lot of good ones. Yeah, I mean, I appreciate them just as paintings. You know, I would put one on my wall. I wonder if you can find those somewhere. I bet they're out there. I hope they didn't get destroyed. But yeah, there's a lot of great matte paintings. And again, you know, visually, the one thing that we always need a ton of in an early 80s fantasy film, we need fog, and we need all the fog you can find. Lots of fog, every fog. Throw in all the fog in the forest. That's it. Just tons of fog everywhere. To cover the fact that everything's made of cardboard.
We do have to talk about all the how derivative this film is with I've seen that before, our usual segment, because there's so much stuff here, especially like stealing from Star Wars. Not only is the elven mind sword just basically the force, like moving it around. So that was Voltan's helmet just straight up looks like Darth Vader, except silver. Yep. Straight. And by the way, also a burn victim, exactly like Darth Vader. And so and he needs, you know, special treatment from other powers.
Yeah, that's true. That crystal's kind of like his own like exterior Vader suit, you know. Just go back and power up once in a while.
And then you know, this takes from a bunch of tropes, not only from, you know, other fantasy or sci-fi movies, but we referenced it earlier, but Ennio Morricone's scores, especially for The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, and the Clint Eastwood trilogy, the score is very, very reminiscent of that. It has the same leitmotifs. It has the same shots, though. I was laughing so hard in that first scene where he's saving the witch, and it's literally just the eyes shots that they use in the Mexican standoff from The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly with the doo-doo-doo, the electro, like the synthesizer sound. I'm like, you just literally took this from The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, except it's not a standoff. It's just them looking at each other and standing there with swords.
And it's the thing is the way this movie does it, it's so intentional that you don't feel like it's being ripped off.
No, it's
you feel
fun.
like it's being done for comedic effect.
Yeah.
It's being done to be like a fun, hey, that's a funny reference moment, you know? So I don't mind it. It's goofy and it's silly. You know, obviously, like you mentioned, there's all these like themes of westerns, right? Where it's like some ruffians roughing up some people, and the sheriff, the hero, shows up and puts them in their place. Like we get that again over and over again.
It is very much intentionally comedic, and the way we know this is that this isn't some sort of situation like it would be with The Room and Tommy Wiseau, where Tommy Wiseau later on was like, haha, it was just a joke, guys, but we all know he was very serious when making that movie. He was way too serious, because the thing about Terry Marcel is he's done a bunch of these like goofy ass movies, and like he clearly knows that he's making goofy ass movies.
This is one of his least goofy movies, if you can believe that. This is if you see a lot of his, I have seen some of his other stuff, and it's way crazier and kookier and goofier. Like this movie plays it more serious than some other ones. I think this movie shows that he was really trying to, you know, he was being himself, but he was also trying to write a really true dramatic fantasy story that he wanted to become like a franchise kind of thing. I feel like there was a lot of thought put into, you know, what are we going to do for the next one? And I'm kind of sad that we aren't going to get a next one, at least anytime soon. But we certainly haven't since 1980. But it does feel like there was a lot of effort put into this, despite the fact that is, you know, his goofiness, you know, shows through. So, yeah, I don't mind it.
I think it's great. So final thoughts on Hawk the Slayer Doe. I think this was just a wonderful film to start with. This was just such a banger. I loved it so much.
It's one of the all-time classic, you know, B fantasy movies that I'll even give it like a B plus. It's not even solidly in B. It's like a B plus fantasy movie, you know. It is absolutely a film that anyone who is into quote unquote bad movies or just fantasy, or just wants to see something
a good
unique
time.
and fun and have fun, have a good time. Yeah, go see it. It's such a fun movie to watch. It has not aged well, but that's some of the charm of it, you know?
Definitely.
Yes. So don't expect to, be wowed. Expect to have an awesome time because it is one of the most entertaining films I've ever seen.
And it was a great place to start. And I know a lot of you guys, you're really thinking about Lord of the Rings these days with modern series coming out, right? So yeah, we're gonna talk about what everyone's talking about right now next week, which is Lord of the Rings. And by that I mean we will be continuing this series by watching the 1980s animated version of The Return of the King, because that's the next movie in our 1980s Sword and Sorcery, and it is very pertinent, of course, to Rings of Power. And this is happening, guys, because I refuse to watch Rings of Power because I know it's trash, and I'm tired of watching trash, and I am forcing this upon Noah. I would rather watch this.
No, you don't need to force this with me at all. I'm in the same boat. Like here, let me tell you my Rings of Power stories that I did watch. I thought I watched the first season. Which this has never happened before, by the way. I thought I watched the first season, and then to get ready for season 2, because we hadn't decided, we weren't doing it yet. I watched a recap of season 1, and I got to a point in the recap where I was like, I don't remember these scenes at all. I didn't see this. And I was like, I never finished the first season. At some point in the first season of Rings of Power, I just stopped watching. And then I forgot that I never finished it, to the point that I was like, yeah, I think I watched the first season of that. I never did. It bored me to the point where I stopped watching and then forgot to ever go back to it, and then just assumed I finished it. So, I started watching the first episode of season 2, and I'm like, nah, it's so dull. That's the biggest impression I can apply to my time with Rings of Power is it is just way too dull that I have no interest in watching it either or talking about it. And we watched too many bad grindy shows lately that we have to just kind of get through. So I'm happy skipping that one too. There's plenty of other people on the internet talking about Rings of Power right now. We don't need to add to that, so I'm happy to do a better Lord of the Rings film, the old animated one. Yep.
That's right. The old animated one. I've never seen this, Noah, so I'm excited. I know a lot of people probably have seen it, but I have actually never seen it.
I'm pretty sure I was less than 10 years old when I saw this. So I remember nearly, I basically don't remember any of it. So it's going to be kind of like watching it for the first time for me too. So I'm hyped.
Yep. And you guys can, you can find a lot of these films that we're going to be discussing for free, just online, just sitting there for you to view.
A lot of them, just pick your video site of choice, and a lot of them are just out there right now,
including Hawk the Slayer. If you haven't seen it, I rented it on Amazon Prime because it's a little bit higher quality, so you can do that route too.
I get it for free with my Amazon Prime. Ooh. Region differences. Ooh.
Anyway, guys, thanks for watching. We will be back if you're looking for some potentially better, Lord of the Rings content than what might be out there for you right now. Perhaps you will consider joining us for the 1980 animated version of The Return of the King. Tell us what you thought of our Sword and Sorcery arc. We'll see you next week.